So the goal of this, we had a couple little bits of information that popped out last night after the CMC AB town hall, where representatives from the DoD showed up. But really, the information that's come out so far describes, very clearly that this is strategic intent. This is not final policy, but it is very indicative of the way that the direction that the DoD is headed in. And so, this little section right here is basically an attempt to take the notoriously spread out and not very well organized information provided from DoD, the notice that we had that was supposed to go into the Federal Register, and try to categorize it into something that's much quicker and easier to understand, with just a couple of takeaways based off of what we can infer from what they've told us. So the first things first, everything is going to revolve around rulemaking. In order for this entire process to happen, has to go through rulemaking. So DoD has said that they plan on doing rulemaking in 32 CFR as well as in 48 CFR. All the rulemaking that we're currently familiar with has happened really under 48 CFR, since that's where they create DFARS rulemaking. It's where a lot of the contract clauses that Bob mentioned, such as 7012 and 7019, 7020, are going to be codified. But the idea that they're going to be doing rulemaking in 32 CFR is part of an overall push that they've given us that said that they're going to be aligning, harmonizing. There's lots of new vocabulary that they're using to describe their strategic intent, but really aligning themselves with existing standards such as the CUI program, as well as NIST standards. So this rulemaking process has to happen sort of in two prongs here. And like we said earlier, we definitely have some significant technical difficulties, so there's a little bit of lag on the slides. But anyways, we have to do the rulemaking in two different areas. And what's interesting is that the DoD has expressed in multiple areas through the information that they've published that they are going to try and do this as expediently as possible. So I am no expert in how expedient that could be, but based off of my understanding and sort of the read of what they've done, this is at the end of that long Pentagon internal review that was coordinated across multiple DoD components, all the way up to SecDef. We heard all about the Tiger Team coordination across the Pentagon last night on the AB Town Hall, and they have come out ahead of time with their strategic intent and said that their timeline for rulemaking is as aggressive as they hope for it to be, which in previous rulemaking, from what we've seen, they've never really given that sort of an estimate. They've never really said, yes, we're going to try to put the pedal to the metal and go as quickly as possible. Now, overall, outside of when that estimated timeline might be, they said there are no pilots, there's no case-by-case inclusions. And this was, we hadn't really had any pilots that were actively running for some time, and the DoD wasn't planning on doing any case-by-case inclusions for the last several months. Now, just very quickly on that idea of the 90 to 24-month timeline, Bob, I don't know if you give any credence to the idea of expediency in terms of the pace, but my sort of read here is that they have signaled pretty clearly that they are consolidating and focusing on a much more narrow idea of what's important to them. And that leads me to believe that they may actually be telling the truth, that they would like to go quicker.
Well, I think that they would like to go quicker, but actually accomplishing quicker is tough. It was emphasized during the AB program and emphasized in the slides that the DoD has made available that they are bound with rulemaking in a sense, like it or not. And rulemaking is an arduous process. After all, it was about a month ago, I think, that the comment period closed for the present interim rule. They received 850 comments, as we've heard many times. And it proved to be quite arduous for them to get through those comments. Well, here, maybe they're doing a better job of communication, and maybe they are setting their sights a little lower. But when they come up with two parallel sets of rulemaking under 32 CFR for the CMMC program and 48 CFR for the actual contract clauses, well, there are going to be comments, and those comments have to be adjudicated. They have to be resolved first with the DoD, and then they go over to the OIRA unit of OMB, where they have to be vetted as well. And since we heard, Jacob, that they're looking to make DoD, they're looking to align DoD with what they expect or anticipate from other federal agencies. And so that suggests that in the rulemaking process, they're going to need to check around with DHS and CISA and Commerce and the like. Now, one further point, though, is one of the things that was on the slides presented yesterday is that they're not going to put these rules out for notice and comment before they're going to issue them as interim rules, as they did the last time. They're going to put them out, and they're going to tell you that you can provide your comments. And they're also going to tell you that the interim rules are going to take effect 60 days from the date that you get to read them. And so we are going to see many of the mechanics that have been discussed presented to us 60 days before they come into effect. And so we're not very far in time from at least having some of these new propositions becoming rules that are binding, even if on interim basis.
And that's been a real sort of elephant in the room here that I know that, Scott, we've had lots of questions that have come in, both today and since the news broke about the new information. Bob, some people are reading the idea that when the requirements go into effect at the end of rulemaking, there's a possibility that they'll do an additional sort of phased roll-in or anything like that. But it hasn't been mentioned so far. Maybe it's mentioned in rulemaking, but like you said, if it's an interim rule period, by the time those interim rules are in effect, would you say that there's the possibility that they have somewhat accelerated the timeline if they stick to that sort of absolute language? Obviously, it's not policy in the news, but it seems unusual.
Well, we're kind of speculating. But
right.
To do
yes,
that.
Absolutely. We want to clarify.
I don't think that they are going to require assessment and certification until there is a final rule. Mm-hmm. It's possible that they could cause this to come into effect at the end of that 60-day period following the publication of the interim rule. But that would sort of get them ahead of themselves, and they seem to be wary of taking demanding steps until they're sure that they're through the rulemaking process.
So kind of to that point, Bob, so let's say they don't do the 60-day after the interim rule drops, but they wait till rulemaking is done, and that rulemaking completes in this time frame of 9 to 24 months. But at that point is when these clauses start going into the final rules, start going into actual contracts immediately. Rather, that could be, let's say it's 24 months. That could be what, November 2023, right? If these rules start hitting every contract in November 2023, that's 2 years faster than, the phase-in time period was for CMMC, 1.0. And as early as, if it's 9 months, you're talking about September of next year. So that's a significant acceleration if that happens that way. Now, obviously, we are speculating here, but that's just my read of the tea leaves here. What do you think?
Well, one of the things that concerns me is that some members of the defense industrial base will look at CMMC 2.0 and see it as a deferral of what's required, and that they'll use it as an excuse or rationale to slow what they're doing or stop. I think that's a big mistake. And Scott, you pointed to another reason that it is a mistake. If it turns out that you're going to be subject to an assessment in 2 years, and if you already are getting information of military significance critical to national security, well, then you're going to have to be ready, not when the RFI comes out. You're going to want to be ready before that RFI comes out, because it could be just too difficult to accomplish what's necessary if you do little and wait until then. So I think it's a great opportunity indeed. It's a great opportunity to take the interval between today and the effective date of the eventual regulations to clean up your act and to do better.
And on that note, where you talked about the fact that you don't want to wait until the balloon goes up in order to be ready. So on the next slide, we said we're still they're very upfront that says we have not figured out reciprocity or equivalency between international partners or other standards yet, but that'll be covered during the rulemaking. But then they are also careful to say this is still implemented via contractual requirements. It's still going to be implemented via flow down mechanism. And one of the behaviors that we saw that was very common during CMMC 1.0 was that the primes who would be flowing these requirements into their supply chain to what is arguably the majority of the defense industrial base beyond that sort of tier one and prime subcontractor level, they aren't always as good with their data governance or be able to anticipate what the nature of the data will be that they send to you for future opportunities. And so they ended up high watermarking a lot of suppliers who believed, that they may not need what was CMMC level 3 beforehand. And I don't see any indication that a focus on more critical data would cause the primes to, leave that behavior behind. There has been nothing in the changes that we've seen from 1.0 to 2.0 that would suddenly and magically cause everyone's data governance flowing to you to be better. And so I think that situation of high watermarking folks into this new higher tier level 2 that still requires external assessment is very likely.
I could not agree more. I look at the slides that were presented yesterday by the DoD team, and they say that third-party assessments for level 2 are going to be required for acquisitions that involve information critical to national security. What's that? I mean, that's actually not a CUI category by itself, and it's different than covered defense information in 7012. Now, maybe they're going to decide that this is just export controlled information or CTI, controlled technical information of military or space significance, but we don't know that. If I'm a company and I'm in the defense industrial base and some of my work seems more sensitive or impactful than others, I think the only prudent decision is going to be to assume that you are going to be subject to assessment when the rules are in place, because you're not going to make the decision on whether the information that you have or you get in the course of performance is or isn't information critical to national security. That's going to be decided above you at the level of the program office, or perhaps by the prime, who will be making critical decisions of what to share and what not. And in general, going back to Scott's earlier question, primes are going to resolve doubts in favor of considering that what you get is information critical to national security. Primes are in a much better position to answer questions and avoid compromise if they expect or demand more of their supply chain rather than less.
Yeah, absolutely. And, on the idea there, we still have not abandoned the rhetoric that by, Congress or anyone else that says that the goal here is to hold the primes accountable over the years. I mean, back when you guys were writing Deliver Uncompromised, this was a massive theme that was carried forward into the NDAA legislation in 2020 that said that they want to hold the primes accountable. And so a lot of times that high watermarking phenomenon is a risk mitigation measure on their part, even if they wanted to sort of reduce the obligation for their downstream suppliers.